I've been on like 500 million bazillion first dates, and I really want to share my first date red flags because I have seen it all, and I just don't want my beautiful babies out there to waste their time on these pathetic men when there's other good ones out there. First red flag is if he tries to touch you other than the greeting and goodbye hug. That man should not need to touch you on the first date, period. That means that there's only one thing on his mind, and he should be scared of you. Like, he needs to not touch you on the first date. 2, the men are gonna get so mad at this one. I already know. I don't care. Get off my page. He needs to pay for the entire bill. Yes, okay, you can split the bill and further on in the relationship, but the first date, he needs to be paying for 100% of the bill. Don't care what you say. Number 3, if you're finding yourself having to overcompensate and talk a lot because he's not talking enough, number 1, either he's not interested in you and he wants the date to end, or number 2, he just doesn't know how to hold a conversation, and a grown man needs to know how to hold a conversation. Also, if he's talking about himself the whole time and he's not asking you questions about yourself, leave. He does not care about you. He just wants to hear the sound of his own voice. This will maybe common sense, but if they bring up their ex to any extent, drop him. Do not talk to him again because he is not over her. Last one, if he says you're difficult in any way, I literally went on a date and I ordered the most expensive thing and he was like, oh, you're hard to please. Baby, if you're broke, just say that.
Today's topic will be 5 reasons why smart men avoid marrying or dating single moms. I want to cover an important topic when it comes to 5 important things you guys need to recognize when it comes to getting involved on a long-term basis with single moms. So let's hop straight into this because over the course of the years, I've done a lot of coaching calls with the guys. And I've got a call booked next week with a guy that's very high profile, makes over $250,000 a year, very successful in his field, but he's very, very badly tied up on a single mom that basically abandoned him and left him. He's got one it for it. So I'll hop into the 5 things. Now, before we go into it, I want to say this. Yes, I know there are some ladies out there that are going to be like, not all women are like that. There are unicorns out there. Congratulations, your unicorn ribbon is in the mail. It's coming your way. But on a balance of probabilities, these are the 5 most important things, guys, that you really need to be a lot more attentive to, so you don't wind up in a situation where you can't function, or you've had some issues getting over a lost one, usually the single mom. Number 1, cuckolded. Now, if you're not familiar with what cuckolded is, this is probably one of the biggest factors that most smart guys, when they're navigating the sexual marketplace, will pass on single moms, because usually the biggest reward when it comes to children is the fact that they carry your DNA and your last name. It's such an important thing that when you get into Hollywood pieces or media pieces, involve royalty or anything that's regal, For example, let's take the Game of Thrones as a recent example. You heard throughout the entire series, well, he's not Stark, And that's what the consistency is when it comes to cuckolded is, yeah, it is important. But it's so important to men as fathers that they know that their name is passed on. They know that their name carries meaning, and that name with its DNA is passed on. You get involved with a single mom and you start to raise her kids. You're basically raising another man's children. You're a cook. There are animals in the wild that'll basically drop the eggs in the nest of other birds, more specifically, and those dumb birds will raise the eggs that are hatched as their own. They don't pay attention to the details. And that's really what guys get themselves into when they get wound up with single moms, is they end up getting cuckolded, where they end up essentially applying their tools, resources, and everything to the genetic investment of another man. It's not particularly rewarding. It's often used as a disparaging term on the internet these days. It's usually the number 1 reason why most guys pass on it. And if that's not enough for you, I got 4 more coming your way. Alright, let's hit on number 2. So the second problem with getting involved on a long-term basis with single moms, fellows, is you've got 100% responsibility with 0% authority. What I mean by that is when her children specifically need something, resources, you're trying to fix something, cars, broken, tuitions, due for college or university or something like that. There are children. But when it comes time to discipline them or to enforce boundaries, most guys often find that they're her children at that time. And that's not a great deal for guys because you're basically used like an ATM, your views to facilitating her new world order, the conditions that she wants her children to live in, to benefit from specifically. So understand that if you do get involved with a single mom, not only one, are you being cocked, but number two, for the most part, you're gonna end up having 100% responsibility with no authority. Now, that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you're involved in a relationship, usually it doesn't end there. Usually, it lasts a little bit longer, especially if you're living in a way that the state determines would be considered a marriage, whether it's common law, whatever it is that it's going to be called, where you live in the world. But there are many cases that I've come across where a guy gets involved with a woman with children in tow from a prior relationship or relationship. In some cases, sometimes it's many kids from several different fathers, and they're together for a few years, and for whatever reason, things don't work out. She wants to bounce and ends a relationship he may have during that period of time, paid off all of her debt, paid for tuition and school things for her kids. And he can be on the hook over the long term for child support for children that aren't even his. I don't know if there is a greater reason why you should consider avoiding getting deeply involved with single mothers than that. But that alone make like if the state is gonna make you or hold you accountable and responsible for children that you did not father. It's absolutely absurd to me. Men know this, there's no excuse once you know this. But knowing this would continue to pursue a long-term relationship with a single mom. Now, some guys will do it. It's usually because they either aren't aware of the details, one or two, it's low-hanging fruit, and it's an easy option for them. Right. It's easy to get into it. Let's move on to number 3. Alright. So the third one is the victim mindset. This is an interesting one, and one thing that you need to understand is that I have not come across a woman that had children in tow from a prior relationship that did not subscribe to a victim mindset. It's quite common in the narratives that toxic feminism suggests to women because the problem with that version of today's toxic feminism tends to encourage women to be the victim. Like there's always some oppressor holding them down. There's patriarchy, there's somebody that's doing the exact same job. That's making $1 for every 70-odd cents that's sheer. And there's always some narrative around that. And if you're involved with somebody that has a victim mindset, people with a victim mindset simply cannot be happy. They're always going to be looking for an oppressor. They're always going to be looking for a villain. Anybody seeking a villain. The villain in life is always going to have a hard time with that. Now you may not immediately be who she deems to be that problem or that villain, for example, but at some point in the future, you're a man. She's a woman, and feminism isn't particularly warm to masculinity in men these days. If you haven't noticed, you need to be aware that there are going to be issues with a victim mindset. Now, that's not just something you're going to have to deal with her. You're also going to end up dealing with it with her children. Let me give you an example. So we talked earlier about authority without responsibility. If you want to exercise some authority, let's say, and enforce some boundaries, let's say her kids are behaving badly. Maybe they're becoming bratty. They may be a little entitled. There's something that requires some, reeling in, you've got to put some boundaries around it, and you try to enforce them a lot of the times because the kid's mom already subscribes to a victim mindset. They're automatically gonna default to that. That's what they know their children. They don't know any better. Right. There. Always a product of their environment. So if mom subscribes to a victim mindset and has issues with patriarchy, or whatever narrative that she might be using her ex as a bum, he is a loser, which is an interesting thing, by the way, because she's the one that picked him, At the end of the day, she's the one that decided to, It's men that propose to women and she says, I do. So why would she do that? But that's an entirely different topic. But at the end of the day, kids will also use nearly the same strategy on their mom. And then again, that's when you'll find that you've got kids that are no longer ours, but they're now hers. And when you try to enforce boundaries, the emotional manipulation that comes out of that with her kids is going to be problematic for you. It's going to be exhausting. All right, let's move on to number 4. So number 4 is financial issues. From my experience, like I'm an entrepreneur, I have multiple sources of income. With my experience in the dating pool, And in a lot of these guys that I coached that have run into problems with women in a sexual marketplace, when it comes to getting involved with single moms, they don't work high-end paying jobs. Most of them don't. Anyway, if I'm being honest, they for the most part, will select professions like teaching, nursing, childcare, giving reception, aesthetics things, stuff like that. They're not particularly high-paying jobs, and if they have got kids in tow, they're often ones usually fighting with their acts for access to money and the children, which actually brings another problem. I can touch on this very briefly. You end up dealing with custody overwhelm, because still to this day, women get about 80% of the custody orders awarded to them. So that means the kids are going to be with her most of the time. There are a lot of guys that find themselves in a scenario where they end up not only being cocked, raising another man's kids, but he may in fact, if he has kids, if he's divorced, end up spending more time with another man's kids than gets to spend with his own, because his ex has custody most of the time as well. So the dynamic of that is bizarre. But coming back to the financial issues, most women don't have a whole lot to show for themselves when you meet them. And they've got kids in tow. I haven't met that many personally myself. And of course, most of the guys that I've coached that have been dealing with problems, exiting a long-term relationship, or even marriage if they got involved with one with a single mom, are often, of course, the breadwinners because of hyper. Right. Women always like to marry up data. It's the same thing. If she's left the kid's father and she's looking for another guy, it's generally speaking what she's looking for is some kind of beta provider, right? Somebody that's reliable, that has a good job, has access to resources that would be useful to her and her kids, for example. So it's not like you guys are going to find yourself splitting bills. What will usually end up happening is some story or narratives going to come out about how her kids want to meet you. Then you start going out and you're no longer buying her dinner. You're buying her and her kid dinner. You're no longer, taking a vacation with her down south. All of a sudden her kids are in tow and you're looking after them. You're feeding them. You're entertaining them, which gives you a lot less time for yourself. All right. And the fifth and last one that I want to cover is the reprioritization of your time and your purpose in life. If you guys have followed me for a while on mine, you guys know that I'm often talking about finding your purpose, putting a dent in the universe, and making sure that you've got some impact in life. And one of the things that you'll notice will end up happening if you do get involved with a single mom and ignore my advice is you're going to end up having to reprioritize yourself in the pecking order. I always tell guys that if you're going to allow a woman to enter your life, she should be a complement to it, and not the focus. Often what will ends up happening when guys get involved with single moms, it's usually because they have a lack of options, or they're only able to get the low-hanging fruit. They end up putting themselves in a position where they're no longer their own mental point of origin, meaning with every decision they make, they consider themselves first, but they end up putting themselves behind her job. The crazy chick from the accounting department that she bitches about every day, her kids, extracurricular activities, the cat. And then maybe, you come in like 5th, 6th, or 7th or something like that. But often what ends up happening, fellows, is you're really not that much of a priority to her. She's going to disagree with me on this, of course, because it doesn't look good. If you end up putting yourself in a bad position where you're no longer your own mental point of origin, there's a lot of pointing and sputtering that you guys are going to find in the comments. At this point, you're going to see a lot of angry women saying, well, that's not true, or they're going to make ad hoc attacks on me. Here's the thing, guys. I've not met a single mom where it would have been worth my while to get involved in it. There are a lot of other potential problems that could come out of getting involved beyond the 5 that I've mentioned there. I'll give you a real quick example. Let's say that you're a dad and you got a daughter and she's young. The biggest risk to 2 little girls is in blended families when they get involved and they've got step siblings that might potentially assault or violate her. It happens quite a lot. You see a lot of those videos prevalent on the internet about stepbrother and sister having sex because they are horny and alone in the house quite often, and they view it as alright. You wouldn't want your little girl being ridden out by a family member, because that will bring a lot of confusion to the household especially if children become involved. That family would be very, very, very confusing and unnatural by today's standards. So you have to have your wits about you and consider that it's probably better for you guys if you're going to get involved with a single mom. You do it on a very limited basis. Play them, don't date them, and certainly do not move in with them or live in a way that the state looks like or that the state could view as a marriage. Because then she could divorce, rape you to kingdom come, and take your well hard-earned money when you didn't even get to enjoy the best of her. So be decisive and firm with boundaries. When it comes to stuff like this, your greatest ROI fellas are going to be investing in yourself, doubling down on becoming a better version of yourself. Stay on your passion and on your purpose, my friends. And of course, making bank, making more muscles, learning new skills. If you're not involved in combat sports, those are the sorts of things that I would encourage you to do. Because if you're forced or you find yourself stuck with low-hanging fruit, more often than not it's because your value's not high enough. Now, a lot of guys will argue with me and say, "Rich, that's all there is out on the dating market. That's all I can get. I'm 38. I'm divorced. I've got kids in tow, what am I supposed to do?" Well, if you're in real good shape and you're a top shelf sort of guy, there's really no reason why you couldn't get involved with women that are in their mid-20s that don't have any kids in tow. There are some women in their 30s that don't have kids in tow. It's entirely up to you. Like I always say in my videos, men are masters of complicating their lives and then justifying why they do it. Stop doing that. Be more intentional about the decisions that you make. There are better ways that they can navigate life and approach sexual marketplace and hold themselves to higher standards. Basically, guys have some dignity. Keep your head above the water and constantly push yourself to go higher and higher. You can do better if you invest in yourself. Don't let somebody else make their problems your problems. Understand that you are a man and you are the prize. Far too many guys will bend the knee and they'll worship women. You know, women are not particularly rare. You know, beautiful women are not particularly in high demand. What's in high demand is strong, virtuous, masculine, competent men that can make bank, that has make muscles. You know, good-looking guys that have their shit together, that understand game and live their life with intention, with red pill awareness and strategies to protect themselves and their families and future generations. That's what's rare and so hard to find in today's society. That's what's in high demand, truthfully. So ensure you are a high-value man who keeps his standards and values high enough to not get involved in that type of situation, which will ultimately end in failure possibly.